It's been a fantastic first season with some really great guests, a lot of fun, some early learnings, and a few unexpected challenges. We're back for 2025. Season 2 will feature new guests, new topics, and a brand new intro. Welcome back to AE Live.
Coming to you on the internet, audio, on my stem, homies know AE's where you gotta go. Shuffle to the rhythm of the Graeme and Michael groove. It's a whole new pure plur interview. Treat your ears to the gist of careers from the list of our engineers and scientists. Maybe twist it up with technologists. It's a podcast, baby, and not to be missed. Got more fly than a ripe banana, like the salmon got the stamina streaming across Canada. Like a trade show cabana, got that swiggity swag and the 411 for my horse Niagara. AE Live, don't you know we're gonna innovate? AE Live, got a topic here to elevate. AE Live, here to entertain and educate. AE Live, oh! AE Live, don't you know we're gonna innovate? AE Live, got a topic here to elevate. AE Live, we're gonna entertain and educate. AE Live, oh!
This podcast was recorded in Vancouver on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. My name is Graeme Nix, and I thank you for taking some time to listen to our podcast. On behalf of my co-host Michael Tolboom and all the people that worked to put this podcast together, it's been a real pleasure to share a bit about what we do here at Associated Engineering with you. Our inaugural podcast actually launched in October of 2023, but I'm including it in our year-end summary since it launched our first season. Episode 1 features an interview with Don Kennedy. Don spent his career working on bridges and seismic engineering. I asked him about his career in bridge engineering and what it was that he loved about seismic retrofitting.
So I think the key point out of that, and the reason I've enjoyed retrofit, or the reasons I've enjoyed this specialty so much, include with an existing bridge, an existing aging bridge, designed to old codes, and you're stuck with the problem. You've got this old bridge like the Misson Bridge. It's on poor soils, liquefiable soils, brittle details. It's going to perform terribly seismically, if it isn't upgraded, which we did quite successfully. But you can't change the problem. You have to deal with the problem that you're given. And so your innovations, your technology, your tools, your materials and your approaches have to be tailored to the problem. When you're designing a new bridge, it's a bit of a blank canvas, and you can mold the problem or the solution to the problem. You have much more flexibility. If you've got a real design challenge, you can change the concept, you can change the materials, you can set that early on. And that takes a lot of experience, and Associated Engineering was particularly good at this.
Don's work has taken him around the world, and he's seen firsthand the consequences of earthquakes and flooding. I asked him to reflect a bit on his past work and if he wonders about how his retrofits will perform in the event of an earthquake in BC.
We know we were successful. For example, one of the things that when we worked on the Oak Street Bridge seismic retrofit, in the early days, I proposed that we do some half-scale testing on some existing, like from the Oak Street Bridge, build some piers with the same details, very similar materials, same poor details, and test them in the lab, and then do retrofits on them and test those retrofits. So the testing of the original as-built details showed that bridge and most of our bridges in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland were atrocious. They were brittle and weak, and they were doomed. And the retrofits that we designed and implemented on the testing, we tested 5 different retrofit schemes. Every single one of them worked extremely well.
Episode 2 features an interview with Rebecca Linskog, AE's manager, Northern Environment. I asked her about what it's like to work in Canada's Northern Territories and the difficulties communities up north are dealing with because of climate change and their remote locations.
The North it's fascinating, and I work in both the Yukon and Northwest Territories, which are very different territories from one another. One is definitely in the prairies, and the other one is in the Rockies. And although they have the same latitude, they're very different from one another. What I love about working in the communities is that they're very community centric, and so it takes people skills in order to be able to come into these small communities and offer our services or solve their problems, give them advice, whatever it might be. We provide all of our services in each of the communities, depending on what they need and what their problems are they need to solve.
If anyone is considering a career that takes you up north, Rebecca's thoughts are a worthwhile listen.
Because we spend so much time in all these communities, we get to know everybody. We get to know the contractors that we use, the heavy equipment that we need to use. We get to know the people that live in the community, and we get to know the government or whatever funders are of the project, and you really become that pivotal piece that makes the project happen. And it's extremely rewarding.
For episode 3, AE's national leader, Indigenous Communities, Frida Leong, shared some stories about working with Indigenous people around Canada. My key takeaway after our discussion was just how important listening is to forming effective partnerships.
Initially, we thought that engagement meant that we were telling people what we were doing. But now we realize, or we hope that people are realizing, that engagement is a two-way street. It's that feedback that's really important. And having the engagement early, not having it once you've come up with the design, getting people and the communities involved from concept. And what we find is that a lot of communities feel like they're still not being heard because, okay, a mine is going to be built adjacent to their traditional territory or to their ancestral territory. And what they're told is like, oh, we're going to do the environmental impact studies. We're doing all this stuff so that we're making sure it's safe for you. But nobody actually had a conversation when it was just a buzz in somebody's brain to put a mine adjacent to a community. Nobody thought about that they're going to be putting a camp of 500 people next to a community of 40 people. Nobody thought about what that meant to that small community. And so it's always that struggle of really getting people to understand what engagement means. It isn't telling people something after the fact and getting them to say, oh yeah, that's great. It's having that conversation when it's still a thought in your mind, because then it's fair, right? Because a lot of times what I see is that you're so far down that rabbit hole that it's very hard to pull up, especially when you've started securing funding for the next phases of work, where you're past concept and you're going into design, and then you get flushed into construction and everything else. That it's almost like, well, it's too late for us to change the route that we've taken. Whereas if you engaged with the Indigenous communities, you'd realize there's such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to understanding the land, when it comes to the history of that land, when it comes to a whole bunch of environmental concerns about that land.
The quarter mark of the year saw the release of episode 4 and a discussion with German Wong about what inspired him to pursue a career in structural engineering. His career includes extensive work with engineered wood, as well as low carbon and net zero construction. I asked German to talk about what was needed to meet the high performance requirements at SFU's Parcel 21 residences.
So on this particular project, we had to detail the exterior walls with outboard insulation in order to help preserve the continuity of the thermal envelope. We also had to detail the residential building interface with the concrete parkade or the concrete foundations. There are several different interfaces where there could be a thermal leak or loss, or we call it thermal bridging. And we had to detail all those connection points carefully in order to minimize those losses and effects. And then thirdly, there were a lot of sunshades and canopies and other appendages that were added for various reasons. So, for example, there were entrance canopies that would allow provide a rain shelter for people at the entrance of the building, but there are also these sunshades that would help provide some cooling against the westerly sun.
Hosted by Michael Tolboom, Episode 5 and 6 is a two-part interview with Judy Yu. Her expertise with intelligent transportation systems has helped municipalities optimize their transportation networks. His conversation included Judy's thoughts on what makes a smart city.
If we're talking about smart decision-making and in a smart city, we're talking about cities that will endure, provide services, net migration is up, economic indicators are up, because the fluid exchange of information is governed. So I think that's, as engineers, we, in the digital future, our engineering expertise has to communicate this in the digital worlds.
As their conversation continued, we also heard from Judy about what the evolution of her work with ITS looks like.
I see in our industry, ITS, I've seen changes in the type of professionals that get engaged. It was civil engineering dominant, which was probably wrong to begin with. And the electricals were kind of cast to the side as like, you don't know anything about transportation. They did a lot of system stuff, but now we're definitely all at the table, especially with autonomous vehicles and connected infrastructure. Both fields are heavily collaborating now with none of that, weirdness. I see more planners getting involved. I see more asset managers get more involved in it because the data part, it's moved so fast. In ITS, what I always loved about it, it's not dormant data. It is real, it is live all the time, and I love that. And so I see that being the base of where we're working out of. So vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure. So if the infrastructure is talking to itself about your movements to make sure you get home safely, what does that look like?
Our next interview featured Kent Eklund, Senior Vice President, Transportation at Associated Engineering. Kent continued our transportation talk with his experiences in transportation planning and his thoughts on light rail transportation and bus rapid transit. I asked Ken to tell me a bit about what it's like to work on projects that span years with a client.
Since they're so big, there's a lot of stakeholders, so there's a lot of challenges with people. And that goes back to one of my earlier comments is you really have to get to know people and, be able to communicate with them to get the buy-in or to help explain a certain situation. And that's, to me, that's the fun part, is getting that relationship with the people in order to develop solutions to complex problems.
We also discussed what he sees as the biggest need for municipalities as they grow and deal with increasing traffic congestion.
One thing a lot of municipalities and government organizations need to do, and which they are starting, is trying to get the most efficient use out of what they have now. So, by using items like intelligent transportation systems, to try and maximize the flow of vehicles on those roadways, on those interchanges. The use of LRT to transport people more efficiently than vehicles on roadways. That's where I find joy in helping the clients. And, and that's where you can help guide their policies to help implement those types of solutions.
Episode 8 again featured Michael Tolboom, this time in conversation with Twyla Kowalczyk, Associated's Manager, Strategic Advisory Services, and Discipline Lead, Climate Resilience. Her career saw her playing an integral role in helping the city of Calgary manage major river flooding in 2013, and now sees her helping municipalities prepare for extreme weather events. What stood out for me with Twyla's conversation was what goes into disaster response and how important it is to recognize that climate change is affecting what a significant weather or climate event is. Events that used to be 1 in 100 years will be more frequent, and what was a 1 in 100 year event will be much larger than standards suggest today.
Absolutely. So once you have these big events, the statistics we use to actually come up with those return period events, that gets redone. So after the 2013 event, the hydrology and the river system is reassessed. And so now what we would say was 100-year on the Bow River at that time is now considered around a 70-year event. And so as we get these bigger events, we can see what that potential is. The other thing that will influence that on the topic of climate change will be more intense rainfall and bigger rainfall. So the hotter the atmosphere gets, the more water vapor it can hold, and it can hold it for longer. And so when we see these events, they're going to become more intense and more frequent. So more rain is going to be able to fall. So what we consider a 100-year event now is going to be much bigger in the future. We're going to see much bigger events. Planning for, a lot of our infrastructure design in Alberta for flooding, the standard from the province is a 100-year flood. In BC, they use a 200-year standard. There's different standards across the country. But from a climate change point of view, we need to be designing for a much bigger size event.
Our season wrapped up with episode 9. For this episode, I spoke with Tondorai Chakanyuka about his extensive career that saw him starting as an engineer in Zimbabwe before making stops in the United Kingdom and finally finding his way to Canada and associated engineering. His international experience gives him an interesting perspective on delivering infrastructure to communities who often have to balance competing needs of aging infrastructure, climate change, and budget.
The challenges that they have are different. The challenges that they have are mainly how do we deliver infrastructure while still being responsible and ensuring that we are not negatively, significantly impacting the environment. So that perspective, what that gave me was an understanding that the success of an infrastructure project really relies on two things. The first being able to meet the primary objectives, which is a matter of infrastructure delivery, right? And then the secondary benefits, which are benefits that while you're delivering the infrastructure, you should also have benefits where the community, from a social point of view, the community is benefiting, the environment is being protected, and you are also doing it in a financially responsible way. So I think that global perspective and local focus, I think, it allows me to pay attention to certain things that perhaps maybe other engineers may miss, other engineers may not pay attention to. So it always gives me the view that I should look at the big picture when delivering infrastructure, knowing that we're not only constructing a pipe that's underground, but we are doing something that is an impact to the community.
And that's it for our inaugural season review. Michael and I have more to share with you, and we're looking forward to more interviews with the amazing staff at the Associated Group of Companies. Season 2 will kick off with a conversation with Craig McDonald, an engineer with Associated Strategic Advisory Services Group. My name is Graeme Nix. You're listening to AE Live. Until next time.
Coming to you on the internet, audio, on my stem, homies know AE's where you gotta go. Shuffle to the rhythm of the Graeme and Michael groove. It's a whole new pure plur interview. Treat your ears to the gist of careers from the list of our engineers and scientists. Maybe twisted up with technologists. It's a podcast, baby, and not to be missed. Got more fly than a ripe banana, like the salmon got the stamina streaming across Canada. Like a trade show cabana, got that swiggity swag and the 411 from my house Niagara. AE Live, don't you know we're gonna innovate? AE Live, got a topic here to elevate. AE Live, here to entertain and educate. AE Live, oh! AE Live, don't you know we're gonna innovate?